And so I have an exciting time of my life coming up very soon. I really do. It's really cool. My wife, who actually made it today, I wasn't expecting her to be here. This is a real joy. And I have our 3rd wedding anniversary coming up towards the end of May. And that is really, really amazing. And what it does mean for someone who's a really bad procrastinator, like I am, it means that I had better kick it into gear getting the wedding anniversary plans set. But this year I actually did a really good job. And we are going to be heading to Portland, Maine, and experiencing life away from Texas heat in the middle of May. So I'm really excited to go spend time with her there. And we're going to go try to eat lobster and have a really good time. And it's been really interesting for me this year. I don't reminisce a whole lot over our wedding as much as I probably should. I'm really guilty about that. It was all kind of a blur, and I was just kind of excited to finally be married to her. But this year, it's been a really good opportunity for me to really reflect back on kind of all the joys of wedding that came for us. And so I've been thinking about how much fun we had at, my bachelor party with my friends, and then the joy of the day and getting to see friends and family and experience the reception afterwards. And I've been able to go and really kind of dig into something that I realized I was never really planned, never really prepared for. And I wish that other men would have warned me, but older gentlemen, you failed me miserably. No one warned me about the wedding planning. I was so naive. I had no idea what was coming, that for me, as a spouse, I had very little expectation of things. I think I really wanted to fight for about 2 or 3 things for the entire wedding preparation. And then my wife was very much ready for lots of details to come about. And I realized that this isn't the norm for every relationship. But for us, she was ready, and her mother was ready. And so I walked into this situation to where I was like, oh, there are floral arrangements and table settings and flowers, and I just don't care. Is there food? Are we going to be in the same building at some point? And great. All right. Are my friends going to be there? Well, that's a plus. But it was so mind-blowing for me to see how much labor goes into a wedding. You never really know until you get to that point. And then it's pulled off. And then you see this glorious event happen. And not just glorious because it's 2 people coming together as one in the sight of God. That's vastly important. I get that. But what's also really amazing to me is to see not just how 2 people are united together, but how you have 2 separate stories, 2 peoples from 2 very vastly different pasts. They come and they weave their stories together. And so the reception is always this really exciting thing for me now, because I get to see how my story is woven together with someone's I've never met before. And so you get to meet new people, learn new faces, and see all of us kind of coming together in a new way that never ever happened otherwise. And there's cake and punch, which is nice too, and dancing, which are also really, really great things. But it's this really beautiful story about people coming together and all this labor to get to that point. And I, as I said earlier, had no idea how much was going into this. And so when we come to the text today, we're actually going to be looking at John chapter 2, verses 1 through 11. We're going to see a story about a wedding. And as much graying of hair and stress that was due to our wedding for one single day, we're going to read about a wedding story, and I don't want us to miss this. I always forget that Jews knew how to party. That's why they have festivals and feasts, and they know how to do this so much better than I do as just kind of a typical WASP guy. I don't do parties very well. But the Jews do. And so their weddings aren't just wedding celebrations or a wedding ceremony. They call them wedding feasts. And it's not just a feast. It's a 7-day celebration of life and family and love. It's a big deal. I remember Bethany's stress right before the wedding for one day. And what blows my mind is the amount of legwork and preparation that goes into a Jewish wedding must be incredible. And all too often I miss that, and I just wash right over it in the text. And I don't think the problem is as serious as it should be, and I always just don't deal with this as one who thinks that this is actually really a problem. But let's get to the text. And so we start in verse 1 where it says that on the third day there was a wedding in Cana of Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there. Jesus and his disciples had also been invited to the wedding. And when the wine gave out, the mother of Jesus said to him, "They have no wine." And Jesus said to her, "Woman, what concern is that to you and to me? My hour has not yet come." And his mother said to the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." Now, standing there were 6 stone water jars for the Jewish rites of purification, each holding 20 or 30 gallons. Jesus said to them, "Fill the jars with water." And they filled them to the brim. And he said to them, "Now, draw some out and take it to the chief steward." So they took it. And when the steward tasted the water that had become wine and did not know where it came from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew, the steward called the bridegroom and said to him, "Everyone serves the good wine first, and then the inferior wine after the guests have become drunk. But you have kept the good wine until now." Jesus did this, the first of his signs, in Cana of Galilee, and revealed his glory, and his disciples believed in him. Jesus is in the middle of life and celebration of joy of 2 people coming together. What's really frustrating to me about the Gospels is at times is they kind of give you things on a need-to-know basis. And they never really give you all the information that I want to know, like who is the party for? Who is the wedding for? How is his family connected? How were the disciples there? I'm a voracious reader of nonfiction, like really bad pulp nonfiction too, like not like really good high literature. Like I read ridiculous stuff. And so I always kind of want to know just all the fun little details that go on in a story. For some reason, that's really fascinating to me. But in this passage, there's not a lot of detail. You have Jesus' mother. Jesus and his disciples show up. And then there is an immediate crisis in the midst of the wedding. And kind of as we talked about earlier, we were talking about how all the planning and all the preparation that goes into a wedding and kind of the stress that brings. And I cannot begin to imagine the massive amount of stress to realize that you have run out of wine for your week-long wedding festival. My wife's brain would have exploded. It would have been awful. Bad things. And so you have this point where you have Jesus' mother, Mary. The text never calls her that, but Mary goes to Jesus. Evidently she's a concerned citizen, and she simply tells him they've run out of wine. And in a simple phrase that really expects him to do something about it, right? Like you don't just tell someone that to be like, "Oh, they ran out of wine, that stinks." They ran out of wine, Jesus. And his response is mind-blowing to me for a couple of reasons. He responds, "Woman," first, which is really awkward because I don't address women with respect to call them by their gender. That's really foreign to me. It's a term of respect for the ancient Near Easterns, but I'm expecting like ma'am or mom or something of deference. But so it's really not that big a deal as it is an affront on my senses at first. He says, "Woman, what concern is that to you or to me? My time has not yet come." And if you are translating this Greek phrase into the English, you might do what I do because I'm a good Southern kid, and I say, "How's that my problem? What do you want me to do about it?" Jesus is taking a stance back from the situation, and he takes a stance back for a really interesting reason. He says, "My hour has not yet come." Jesus has just been baptized by John, and so he's at the beginning of his ministry. And most of us don't think that's a big deal because we've read Matthew and Luke and Mark, and miracles are very frequent. They're almost kind of a dime a dozen. Like we just expect Jesus at this point to be doing miracles all the time. But John's stingy, and you get 7. You get 7 miracles in the whole Gospel of John. And so when there's something happens for Jesus to manifest his time and his hour, that's a really big deal. And so Jesus is saying, this is not my hour. And he is referring to, of course, because we know the end of the story, right? Look, we know what happens. Jesus is referring to his descent to Jerusalem and the death and the burial and the resurrection and his fullness of glory. And this is where this story makes me so happy. I have a ridiculously sassy mom. She is full of authority and power and speaks things over in my life, and I'm so thankful for her. But she does it in these very indirect ways. And I look at Mary in this, and I see a lot of my mother, and I'm probably inferring way too much to this text to put my mom into its place. But I'm guilty of a little eisegesis, and you're just going to have to forgive me for that. And so she goes up to him, and she says this, and his response is, well, it's not my hour yet. And she doesn't even argue. She's just I imagine it's kind of this, okay. So she just turns to the servants, and she goes, just do whatever he tells you. And then she exits the scene, and she's done. And Jesus has to fix this problem. And so Jesus, as a good son, begins to fix the problem. And he sees a bunch of stone jars for purification, which they would have been using that week to wash their hands and their faces before the meals and after the meals and during rituals. And they fill them. And they make 120 to 180 gallons of wine, which is no small feat. That is roughly, if you were to walk into a store, 605 to 908 bottles of normal wine. That's a lot of wine. And even for a celebration lasting a week, and there are lots of people there, that's a really big deal. Probably way more than they ever needed to have. But he does it. And I love that this is a low-key miracle, that this isn't something that just kind of happens and there's a big scene. Nobody even realizes it happened until they go and they fetch the water, and they go to the steward, and then the steward's like, where'd this wine come from? We just ran out. And why did you just bring me the really good wine when you should have brought it to me earlier? The steward, for me, becomes someone who I identify with so much in the text. Because the steward is completely thrown off by this situation. He's not anticipating it. And so he rushes to the bridegroom and he's like, why did you wait for the good stuff now? They've already been drinking for a while. You know how this works. One, it blows my mind and my expectations a little bit, because full confession, I grew up as a Southern Baptist. And so, wine? There's no wine in Southern Baptist life. And so, I don't even know what to do with this story, as a kid who grew up in that faith tradition. But here it is, and it's God making a ton of wine for a wedding feast. And it makes me really awkward. But I'll deal. And so he continues, and he's just really thrown off, and he's just like, okay, I don't know what to do with this, so here it is. I guess we'll just kind of continue with this miracle, with this feast, and continue on the way. And there's no big scene, there's no big rush and glory of adulation of Jesus. Jesus goes and does this, and the people know, and then later his disciples believe, but it's very, very subtle. And they continue the wedding party. And yet in that subtle miracle, or sign, as John calls it, it says that Jesus revealed his glory, and his disciples believed in him. And for someone who's never really dealt with what does it mean for someone to believe in God because they made a bunch of wine, which really just looks like a cool party trick, right? It's like someone you want to take with you to a sorority or a fraternity party, if you're honest. That's kind of what the trick looks like. And so my expectations are so confused and turned about when I come to this text, just like the steward. But here's how it happens, and here's what's amazing to me. John, being a much better understander of Jesus than I am, or whoever the beloved disciple happened to be, does this really beautiful thing where he is showing us not just that Jesus is the divine, not just that Jesus is the Son of God, as he so eloquently puts in chapter 1. He does this other thing where he's showing us what life in the kingdom is like, and what does it mean to be a follower of God in ways that I don't expect. I'm not a good Jew. My grasp of the Old Testament is not the same as a lot of others who are steeped in it. And so I miss this time and time again. I forget that Jesus is showing us a picture of what God's kingdom looks like, and he's calling back to faith a long time ago. In Amos and in Joel, they're very specific about what God's kingdom is going to look like in a crisis moment in Israel's faith. They've been deported, they've been conquered, they're in exile, and life generally is really horrible for the Jews at this moment in their life. And Joel and Amos have the audacity to speak hope to them in a seemingly awful situation. And they say that the mountains will run with sweet wine, and the hills will roll with wine as well. And it's this beautiful picture. So they're saying, in the midst of your despair, in the midst of your suffering, in the midst of your pain, in the midst of your, oh no, we don't know what to do, God is going to give you an abundance of presence. And it's a symbol of wine. And so for me, when I come back to this text, it catches me off guard again. Because Jesus is saying that my kingdom looks like this. It looks like an overabundance of sweet wine, like the mountains. So in the midst of something that's awful, in the midst of something that's terrible, in the midst of something that is not quite right, God's kingdom is a lavish overabundance of the goodness of who God is. That looks like a wedding party that gets to continue. I am too Western. My vision of life with God is too much like Elysium and fields and like weird harps and stuff, and that never really makes sense. But for the Jews, God's kingdom is a party that continues. And we have a story where we get to sit at a table and feast with one another, and we learn more about each other and who God is and who we are as God's people together. And that, my friends, that is good news. Thank you.